for joining me today on Susan's Cozy Kitchen. Today I'm making one of my favorite side dishes from when I was a little girl. This is my mom's fabulous squash casserole. I have a kind of a medium pot that I'm going to cook the squash in initially just to get it nice and soft. So I've got a little bit of water in here. I'm going to add some salt, just a few sprinkles. Next I have 5 kind of medium-sized yellow squash. I'm going to cut off the ends and then I'm going to slice them fairly thin and put them into the water. And I like to leave these in rounds. You could cut your squash in half and then slice it whichever way you like. I like the rounds, so that's how I do it. So there's squash in the water, and I'll just keep going with this until I have all the squash in there. And just for reference, I'm cutting these about 1/4 inch thick. I do that so that the squash sort of holds together and you can see that it's slices of squash once it's in the casserole and cooked. Okay, so there's all of the squash. Next, it's time for the onion. This is a yellow onion. I'm going to use maybe a half. So if you like a lot of onion flavor, you might want to add for sure a half, maybe more. If you only want just that mild hint, then maybe a 1/4 or even less. If you're using the dried dehydrated onion that I like to use so often, anywhere from a teaspoon to a tablespoonful, depending on how oniony you want your squash casserole to be. This is a yellow, fairly sweet type onion, so it gives a nice oniony flavor without that sharpness, and that's what I like. There's my half an onion, and into the pot this goes. Grab a wooden spoon, give it a little stir, and you don't want a lot of water in this because the squash is kind of a water-filled vegetable anyway, so you don't want it to have too much. You just want enough in there to cook the squash without it being watery at the end. You can see it's not quite covered, but it's in there. So there it is, it's like right there. To the squash and onions, I'm going to add a little bit of freshly ground pepper. So there's some pepper, just kind of all over the top. And now a bit of butter, just a nice little pat. That's not quite a tablespoon. Add more, add less, whatever makes you happy. Now I'm going to cover it, turn it on, and let this cook until the squash and the onions are soft. Okay, while the squash is cooking, I'm going to take this time to work on the rest of the ingredients for the casserole. So I have 4 ounces of Colby and Monterrey Jack cheese that I'm going to shred. I like to use the Colby and Monterrey Jack blend because, you know, you have that mild cheddar flavor and it's not overpowering. It lets the squash still be star of the show and it melts so nicely. Okay, I'll put the cheese into this bowl, sit it off to the side, and have it ready and waiting when the squash is finished. 1 lightly beaten egg. Go ahead and get that going. So there's just nice little light. Okay, now the egg is ready to go in. And last but not least, the vegetable crackers. Now, as I said, you can use Saltines, you can use Ritz. I like to use these vegetable crackers. They're my store brand here. You know, I've never really measured. I just throw in a handful or 2. I just sort of eye it. I may add more, I may add less. Once I get them in here, I just crunch them up. You know, I don't pulverize them, but I do crush them. And, you know, I would say once they're crunched up, there's maybe half a cup. All right, so you see, yeah, right at 2/3. Now this is boiling take a look at that. It's boiling nicely. Going to give it a stir just to make sure nothing's sticking on the bottom. Yeah, it doesn't take a lot of watching. Don't let it overcook, just let it get nice and soft. Anything that may have been out of the water, I'm trying to make sure it gets down into the water, and then the lid goes back on and I let it continue cooking. And the last thing I need to do while I'm waiting for the squash to finish is to prepare my casserole dish by adding some butter into it and just smearing all on the bottom and the sides. Okay, there's the butter dish ready for the casserole to go in, and I'm ready to wash my hands. Okay, let's check the squash. Okay, I can pierce it easily with the fork. It's looking good. Okay, I'm going to call that done. Now I'm going to drain this in the sink and then I'll be right back with you. Okay, so I've drained the majority of the water out as much as I could without dumping all of the squash into the sink. Don't want to do that. And it's time to start mixing. I start with the crackers and just kind of fold those in a little bit. Okay, next I'm going to put in the cheese. And there's all the cheese, all 4 ounces. Okay, give that another stir. And now it's time for my binder. Now that I've cooled this down a little bit, I don't want this to turn into scrambled eggs, so that's why I add everything else in first. So now in goes the egg, and then another quick stir. And now it's time to pour it into the casserole dish. Now, kind of smooth that out over the top. You can see there's still large pieces of squash in here, so when you cut into it, you're going to know that, hey, this is a squash casserole other than just a bunch of stuff mushed together. All right, now let's put some more crackers in here. I like to do this to give it a crunchy topping. It's not necessary. If you don't want to use the vegetable crackers on top, you could always use Ritz crackers or even Saltines over the top with just a couple of small pats of butter in it. And it does, you know, you don't want it to be too thick on top, just enough to give it a little crunch. My oven is preheated to 350 degrees. I'll put this in and cook it for about 20-25 minutes until it's starting to brown on the top slightly and get bubbly around the edges. Okay, here we are. The squash casserole is done. It has browned on top, it has bubbled around the sides, and it's ready to try. You can see the pieces of squash in there, cheese, the crackers, it all looks so yummy. I'm going to get a bit of all, let it cool. Oh yeah, that is exactly what I wanted. Everything is holding together beautifully. A perfect squash casserole side dish for your next dinner. As always, the full recipe is in the description box below, along with any tips and tricks I may have for you. While you're checking out the recipe in the description box, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up if you enjoyed today's video. If you've not already, please do subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you find out every time I upload a new video to YouTube. Thanks for watching. God bless.